Some people who were in that reception hall that evening still say, I should have stopped my daughter before she reached the microphone. They say she was too young, that it wasn't her battle to fight, that a child shouldn't have to carry something that heavy into a room full of adults dressed in their finest. And maybe they have a point. But here is the thing about my daughter, Nadia. She didn't ask for my permission. She didn't look back at me for a nod, didn't hesitate at the edge of the dance floor, didn't even seem nervous. She walked up to that microphone stand with the quiet, deliberate calm of someone who had already decided, and she tapped it twice, and the entire room heard what came next. I have been replaying that moment ever since. Not with regret, I want to be clear about that, with something closer to awe. To understand why that moment happened, you need to understand the 7 years that came before it. 7 years of Sunday dinners where I sat at the corner of the table and spoke only when asked a direct question. 7 years of my father-in-law, Desmond Hara, using the phrase, the women in this family, as a way of making sure I knew I hadn't fully been included in that category. 7 years of watching my daughter grow up in the warm gravitational pull of the Hara family, and simultaneously watching her grandfather calculate, in ways I don't think he was even fully aware of, just how much of that warmth she was allowed to receive. Nadia is 11. She has her father's dark eyes and my stubbornness, and she has this laugh that starts low and builds, and when she was small, she used to climb into Desmond's lap at Christmas and call him Grandpa Des, and I remember thinking then that whatever tension existed between me and that man would never touch her. I told myself that. I believed it, actually. I was wrong about that. My husband, Kenji Hara, is a good man. I want to say that plainly, because what follows is complicated, and when things get complicated in families, people start assigning culpability like it comes in neat portions. Kenji is not his father. He grew up watching Desmond run the household the way Desmond ran everything, with the specific authority of a man who had never once in his adult life been told no by anyone who mattered to him. Desmond Hara built a regional logistics company over 30 years, sold a controlling interest in his late 50s, and spent the decade since his partial retirement consolidating his identity around being the patriarch of a tight, successful family. He had opinions about every decision his children made. He had opinions about who they married. He had opinions about me from the first Thanksgiving. I was 29 when I met Kenji. I had just finished my second year running a small event design firm that I had started out of my apartment with a laptop and one commercial client who paid me $62,000 for a corporate gala and then referred me to 3 of their partners. I was building something real, but it was young and it didn't look impressive yet from the outside, and the outside was what mattered to Desmond Hara. He asked me what I did that first Thanksgiving, and when I explained it to him, he made a sound, not a word, a sound, and said, "So, like a party planner." I said yes. It wasn't worth correcting. Kenji's mother, Lorna Hara, was different in ways that were both better and harder. She was warm with Nadia in a way that felt genuine. She brought her small gifts, remembered things Nadia said, made her feel seen. But Lorna had been married to Desmond for 38 years, and she had learned to navigate him the way you learn to navigate a current, not by fighting it, but by angling yourself sideways so it carries you where you're already going. When Desmond said something dismissive about me at the table, Lorna would find a way to redirect the conversation that technically defended nobody, but somehow made the temperature drop back to neutral. I understood this skill. I didn't blame her for it. But I also understood that it meant I was on my own. The pattern started establishing itself in that first year and never really changed after that. Desmond would raise a concern about me, about my business, about my income stability, about whether I was the right kind of ambitious for the family he had built, and Kenji would gently push back, and Desmond would go quiet in the way powerful men go quiet when they decide a battle isn't worth winning yet. And then 2 weeks later, he would find a different angle. The first specific incident I kept returning to happened about a year after Kenji and I got married, at a birthday dinner for Kenji's sister, Yumi. Yumi was turning 31, and we were at a restaurant Desmond had chosen, and everyone was in a good mood, and somewhere between the appetizers and the entrees, Desmond looked at me and said he had been talking to a friend of his who ran a commercial real estate firm, and that this friend was looking for an administrative coordinator, and he thought I might want to apply. "It's stable," he said. "Benefits, a real salary." Kenji started to say something. I put my hand on his knee under the table. That's thoughtful of you, I said. I'll keep it in mind. Yumi glanced at me for a half second and then looked back at her plate. She knew, she didn't say anything, but she knew. She wasn't unkind, Yumi. She was just practiced, like her mother, at the art of not making things worse. What I didn't say at that table was that 3 days earlier, I had signed a contract with a hospitality group to design and manage 4 large-scale corporate events over the next 18 months, at a total value of $216,000. It was the biggest deal I had landed to date. I had gone home from the meeting and sat on the kitchen floor and cried a little, not from relief, but from the specific exhaustion of having wanted something so much for so long and then actually getting it. I did not tell Desmond about that contract. I filed it away, the way I was learning to file things away. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, someone with a close-up view of your life who simply refused to update their assessment of you, you know exactly what that kind of silence costs. It's not passive. It's a decision you have to make over and over. The second incident was subtler and in some ways more revealing. Nadia was 4, and we had brought her to a Hara family reunion at a lake house in the mountains that Desmond rented every 2 years. It was a good weekend, mostly. There were cousins for Nadia to chase around, and the lake was cold but beautiful, and Kenji was relaxed in the particular way he only got when he was surrounded by the people he had grown up with. On the last evening, Desmond gathered the extended family for what he called a planning conversation, which was his way of making announcements while making them feel collaborative. He talked about a family trust he was restructuring, about adjustments to how assets would eventually be distributed, about his desire for the family to stay coordinated. He was specific about which family members were included in the primary structure of the trust and which were mentioned as secondary considerations. Spouses, he said, were accounted for, but the bloodline protections needed to be primary. He did not look at me when he said this. He didn't need to. Kenji talked to him privately afterward. I know they talked because Kenji came to bed that night with the specific tension in his jaw that he carries after hard conversations with his father, and he said Desmond had clarified that what he meant was just about simplicity of administration, not about the value of anyone's contributions to the family. He respects you, Kenji said. He said it the way you say something when you're hoping it'll become true if you say it out loud enough times. I told him I believed him. And then I made a note to call my own attorney in the morning about a separate trust structure for anything that was mine and Nadia's. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Desmond had been kind enough to show me exactly where I stood. I decided to make sure I was standing somewhere solid regardless. The third incident happened 18 months before the wedding, and it was the one that shifted something in me from steady patience to something harder and more alert. We were at Sunday dinner, a regular occurrence, and Nadia had brought home a report card that she was quietly proud of, all high marks. One exceptional notation from her science teacher about a project she had done on water filtration systems that the teacher had apparently submitted to a regional competition. Nadia showed it to Lorna first, who made the right sounds and hugged her, and then she brought it to Desmond, who looked at it for a moment and handed it back. "Your cousins both have straight top marks," he said. He meant Yumi's sons. "You should be aiming for that level." Nadia was 9.5. She nodded, slow, and took the report card back, and I watched her fold it along its original crease in that careful, deliberate way she does when she's trying not to show that something got to her. I didn't say anything at the table, but I watched my daughter fold that report card, and something in my chest went very still and very cold, and I understood in a way I had managed to avoid understanding before that this was not going to stay between Desmond and me. It was already reaching her. It had been reaching her for a while, probably, in ways I hadn't seen because I'd been too busy managing my own end of it. After dinner, on the drive home, Nadia was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Does Grandpa Des like me?" Kenji said. "Of course he does, sweetheart. He's just old-fashioned about showing it." I said, "You got exceptional on a project that your teacher submitted to a real competition. That's not a report card. That's an achievement." She looked out the window. "He didn't ask about the water project," she said. "No," I said, "he didn't." There was nothing else to say that was both true and fair, so I left it there. But that night, after Nadia was asleep, I sat in the kitchen for a long time going over what I knew and what I was going to do about it. The answer was not simple. The Haras were not simple. Kenji loved his father in the complicated, conditional way of adult children who grew up both shaped and diminished by a powerful parent. Cutting Desmond out of our lives entirely would mean cutting Nadia off from a family she was connected to, from a grandmother who genuinely loved her, from cousins and aunts, and the particular texture of belonging to something larger than just the three of us. I didn't want to do that to her, but I was also not going to let it keep going the direction it was heading. The decision I made that night was not dramatic. It wasn't a single resolution or a plan with clear steps. It was more like a reorientation, a choice to stop absorbing the dismissals quietly and start building something that would speak for itself loudly when the moment required it. My business had been growing steadily since that hospitality contract. By the time Nadia was 9, I had a team of 4 full-time employees and a reputation in the regional market for high-end corporate event production. I was also doing something else, something I had started 2 years earlier and hadn't told anyone in the Hara family about because it wasn't theirs to know yet. I had been working with an architectural design firm and a small group of investors on a concept for a dedicated event and conference space in the city's redeveloping Eastern District. A real venue. Permanent. Something you could point to on a map. The investor group had come together slowly and carefully, and the lead investor, a woman named Bet Akaffer, who had built and sold a boutique hotel and understood both hospitality and real estate, had believed in the concept from the first conversation. By the summer before the wedding, we had a signed lease, a construction timeline, and a projected opening 14 months out. The venue was going to be called Meridian, and it was everything I had been working toward since I sat on my kitchen floor and cried over that first big contract. I had not told Desmond. I had not told Lorna. I had mentioned to Kenji that the business was expanding, and he had been supportive in the warm, not entirely paying attention way of a person who trusts you and therefore doesn't feel the need to track the details. I hadn't lied to anyone. I had simply not offered information to people who had demonstrated they were not going to receive it correctly. My attorney, a sharp and methodical woman named Davina Cheung, had all the documentation in order. My accountant had the financials structured. Bet Akaffer occasionally called me when she was passing through my neighborhood, and we would get coffee, and she would say, in her direct, no-ceremony way, "You're going to look back on this and understand why the slow build was right." I believed her. The first close call came 4 months before the wedding, at a Hara family dinner in late spring. Yumi was there with her husband and their 2 boys, and everyone was in a good mood because the weather had finally turned warm and Desmond had grilled, which he did with a kind of theatrical ceremony that the whole family had learned to appreciate as a performance of love. We were all on the back patio, and the conversation had wandered from the boys' school schedule to property values in the neighborhood to the general state of the economy. The way family dinner conversations do when the participants are comfortable enough to let topics meander without needing to resolve anything. Yumi's husband, a straightforward man named Garrett who worked in municipal planning and had no interest in the family's status games, mentioned that he'd heard there was new commercial development coming into the Eastern District. Some kind of events venue, he said. Mixed use, I think. The permit applications have been interesting. Whoever's doing it has solid backing. He was not looking at me. He was making conversation. Desmond said, "That district has been underutilized for years." "Is it credible or is it another concept that'll stall out?" Garrett shrugged. "The permits look serious. Active construction timeline could be real." I reached over and cut a piece of grilled corn off the cob. "Sounds promising," I said. "That area needs anchors." Lorna asked Nadia if she wanted more lemonade. Nadia said yes. The moment passed. My heart had been steady the entire time, but under that steadiness there was something else, a specific alertness. The kind that tells you that you navigated something and that the navigation was successful and that you should not relax entirely yet. Garrett did not connect the venue to me. Why would he? The permits were filed under the holding company's name. The holding company had my name buried in it, but not in any way you'd find without looking specifically. Garrett was not looking specifically. He was just talking. I caught Yumi's eye for a moment across the table. She smiled at something her son said. I smiled too. That night I texted Davina, "All good, staying the course," she replied. Expected nothing less. The second close call was harder, and it came from a direction I hadn't fully anticipated. Lorna called me 6 weeks before the wedding. Yumi's longtime partner, Brendan, was finally making it official, and the whole family was collectively elevated in spirits, and she asked if she could come by for coffee. Not as an unusual request, but with a specific quality in her voice that told me this was a purposeful conversation, not a casual one. She came on a Tuesday morning when Nadia was at school and Kenji was at work. I made the good coffee, the kind I kept for when things needed to be done with care, and we sat at my kitchen table, and she asked me how everything was going with the business, with genuine warmth, but also with that sideways quality of a question that is actually a different question. "It's going really well," I said. "Busier than I expected this season." Lorna wrapped both hands around her mug. "Desmond mentioned, and I'm just relaying this because I think you should know what's being said, that someone at his club had mentioned they'd heard about a new venue project in the Eastern District, and that there was apparently a woman involved in the development who worked in events." She looked at me with the careful eyes of someone who has spent decades being simultaneously perceptive and diplomatic. "He's curious," she said. "You know how he is about things that are happening in the city. A lot of people work in events," I said. I picked up my mug. "Did he mention a name?" "No, just the connection." "I hope whoever it is succeeds," I said. "That district has a lot of potential." Lorna held my gaze for just a beat longer than the sentence required, and then she nodded and changed the subject to the flowers Yumi had chosen for the wedding reception, and we spent the next 40 minutes talking about hydrangeas and table arrangements, and whether the venue Yumi had booked had adequate climate control for a mid-July event. After she left, I stood at my kitchen window for a few minutes and worked through what I knew. Desmond had heard something. He wasn't sure. He'd sent Lorna to feel it out rather than asking me directly, which meant he wasn't confident enough to confront it but curious enough to probe. This was how he operated. He collected information quietly and only moved when he felt certain. The question was whether he was going to feel certain before the wedding. I called Davina that afternoon. "Can you verify that nothing is publicly searchable under my name for the venue project?" "Correct. The holding company doesn't surface without a specific business registry search, and your name isn't the primary registration. And if someone did a specific search, they'd need to know what they were looking for. Desmond Hara will know what he's looking for if he decides to look." A pause on her end. "Then we might want to think about timing." "I know," I said. "I'm thinking about it." What I was thinking about was not the venue. The venue was going to be fine, the construction was on schedule, but Akaffer was steady, the financials were structured. What I was thinking about was Nadia. About what Desmond had said to her about her report card. About the way she had folded it along its crease. About the fact that she was going to be at this wedding in 6 weeks, dressed up and proud, and in the full presence of a man who had, despite whatever warmth he occasionally performed, already decided something about her that she didn't deserve to have decided. I had been patient because patience was strategic. I had been quiet because quiet gave me room to build. But I was starting to feel the specific pressure of knowing that the window for controlling the terms of the reveal was narrowing, and that if Desmond found out about Meridian on his own, through his club connections, or through Garrett's permit research, or through Lorna's quiet intelligence work, then the narrative would belong to him. He would frame it as a deception. He would make Kenji feel like I had hidden something from the family. I needed to be the one who chose the moment. I just hadn't found the right moment yet. The thing about timing is that it rarely comes when you are ready for it. You prepare for one version of the moment, and then something completely different walks through the door, and you have to decide in real time whether to use it or let it pass. I had been preparing, carefully and methodically, for the right setting, the right audience, the right configuration of circumstances that would let me speak clearly and be heard clearly and not be maneuvered into a corner before I finished the first sentence. What I had not prepared for was my 11-year-old daughter walking into a wedding reception with a recording on her phone. But that is getting ahead of where we are. 6 weeks before Yumi's wedding, I sat in Davina Chung's office with a folder of documents that represented 3 years of deliberate, quiet construction, and I looked at my attorney across her desk, and I said, "I need a plan for several different scenarios. Not just the one I want to happen, all of them." Davina set down her pen. "Tell me the scenarios." Scenario 1, the wedding passes without incident, Desmond finds out about Meridian through the announcement in the fall, and we manage it from a position of strength. Good scenario. Scenario 2, Desmond finds out before the wedding through his own research, confronts Kenji privately, and Kenji feels blindsided. Davina's expression didn't change, but she picked her pen back up. That's a harder scenario. Scenario 3, I said, and I paused because this was the one I had been thinking about at 3 in the morning for 2 weeks. Something happens at the wedding, something involving Nadia, and I have to decide in real time how to respond. Davina looked at me. Why do you think something involving Nadia is likely? Because Desmond has been recalibrating, I said. I can feel it. He senses something is off, but he can't locate it, and when Desmond Hara can't locate something that bothers him, he tends to find a proxy target. He's done it before. The last time it was Kenji's career choices. The time before that it was Lorna's friendship with a woman he didn't like. When he's frustrated and can't reach the actual thing frustrating him, he reaches for something close to it. I didn't say the next part out loud, but Davina heard it anyway in the silence. And Nadia is close to you, she said. Nadia is exactly as close to me as a person can be, I said. We spent 2 hours in that office going through documentation, contingency language, and a specific set of decisions I had already made and several I was prepared to make if necessary. When I left, I had a folder of materials organized by scenario, each one with a clear set of steps and a clear sense of what I was and wasn't willing to do. I drove home through the afternoon traffic with the folder on the passenger seat and the radio off, and I thought about my daughter and the report card she had folded along its crease, and the way she had looked out the window and said, "He didn't ask about the water project." Everything I had built was waiting for the right moment. I had spent 3 years choosing patience and strategy over reaction. I had absorbed dismissals and calculated the cost, and decided the cost was worth it because what I was building in return was worth more. But I could feel, in the weeks before that wedding, that the patience had reached some kind of edge. Not a breaking point. I am not a person who breaks easily, but a place where the arithmetic was changing, where the cost of continued quiet was starting to outweigh what the quiet was protecting. The wedding was a Saturday in mid-July. The weather was exactly what you hope for at a summer wedding, warm without being brutal. A light breeze off the nearby lake that moved the air just enough to keep things comfortable. Yumi had done everything beautifully, which surprised nobody who had watched her plan anything. The ceremony was outside on the grounds of a restored farmhouse venue about 40 minutes from the city, and then the reception moved inside to a high-ceilinged hall with long wooden tables and flowers everywhere, and a band that knew how to read a room. Nadia wore a navy dress she had picked out herself. She had asked me 3 times in the week before the wedding if she looked old enough for the dress, and each time I said yes, and each time she looked in the mirror with the specific critical evaluation of a person who is trying to see themselves through someone else's eyes. I watched her do this and did not say anything about Desmond, because there was nothing to say yet that would help. We arrived at the reception in the early evening after the ceremony, and the hall was full of the warm, high noise of 112 people who were genuinely happy to be there. Kenji found his cousins. Nadia found Yumi's sons. I found a glass of white wine and a place near the windows where I could see the room clearly and be seen by nobody who mattered yet. Desmond was across the hall, holding court with his business-era friends the way he always did at family events, performing the patriarch role with the easy confidence of a man who has never had reason to doubt his own centrality. I watched him for a few minutes and then looked away. He had not found out about Meridian. I would have known if he had. The evening moved forward the way wedding receptions do, in a series of warm, overlapping moments, toasts and dances, and the specific beautiful chaos of a family that loves each other genuinely and demonstrates it loudly. Kenji danced with Yumi. Nadia danced with Lorna. I watched and felt something that was close to contentment, with that thin edge of vigilance running beneath it that I had not been able to put down in weeks. At some point in the later part of the evening, I was at the table with a few of Kenji's cousins, half in a conversation about a renovation project someone was doing, half watching the room the way I had been watching it all night. Nadia had been at the kids' table for a while and then drifted to find me, and I remember looking up and seeing her crossing the hall toward the table, and then I watched her stop. She stopped because she had heard something. The hallway off the main reception hall led to the restrooms and to a secondary exit, and Desmond had stepped into that hallway at some point in the last few minutes, and his voice was not carrying into the reception, but it was carrying into the section of the hall near the entry to the hallway, which was where Nadia had been walking. I couldn't hear what he was saying. She could. I watched my daughter stand very still in the middle of a crowded, joyful room, and I watched her face do something I had not seen it do before, not quite hurt, not quite anger, but some specific compound of the two that was entirely her own. She stood there for maybe 30 seconds, and then she reached into the small wristlet purse she had been carrying all evening, the one she had been so proud of because it had a magnetic clasp, and she did something with her phone. And then she walked toward the stage. I was on my feet before I had decided to stand up. I reached the edge of the dance floor in about 4 seconds, which was how long it took me to cross the space between my table and the stage when I was moving with purpose but not yet running. Nadia was already there. She had one hand on the microphone stand, not gripping it, just resting her fingers against it the way she does when she's steadying herself, and she looked back at me once, and her face was not frightened. It was resolved. The band had paused between songs, which was the only reason the tap of the microphone carried the way it did. 2 clean taps and the room shifted. Not dramatically at first, just that ambient drop in volume that happens when something unexpected interrupts the natural current of a party. People at the nearby tables looked up. The ones farther back kept talking, but softer, with one ear already tilting toward the source of the sound. Nadia did not wait for the room to fully quiet. She spoke into the microphone with her clear, 11-year-old voice that carries naturally because she has never learned to shrink herself. "Grandpa, did you know I recorded what you said? And everyone here is about to hear it." That was when the entire room went from partially attentive to completely, immediately still. I was 3 feet behind her. I could see Desmond from where I stood. He had come back into the hall from the hallway, probably 30 seconds behind her, and he was standing near the entrance to the reception space with a glass in his hand that he had not yet registered he was still holding. His face did something I had not seen it do in 7 years of watching him. The certainty left it. Not gradually, it went all at once, like a light switching off, leaving something underneath that was much older and much less composed than the man I was used to seeing. Lorna was at a nearby table, and she heard it and her hand went to the pearls at her throat. She always touched her necklace when she was processing something she didn't want to be processing. She was looking at Nadia, and then she looked at me, and for a moment we held eye contact across the room in a way that carried 3 years of everything neither of us had said directly. Kenji was on the other side of the room. I could see him starting to move, working through the crowd, his expression not yet fully readable from that distance, just alert and directional. Nadia had her phone in her hand. She looked at it, then looked out at the room, and then she looked at her grandfather. "You told someone on the phone that I'm just a burden on this family." She didn't say it loudly. She didn't need to. The microphone was doing the work, and the room was doing the rest. There was a specific quality to the silence that followed. Not the silence of a room that is politely waiting, but the silence of 112 people who have just witnessed something they did not expect and are not sure what their role in the next moment is. I stepped forward. I put one hand on Nadia's shoulder, not to pull her back, not to intercede, but just to let her know I was there. Desmond's glass finally registered in his hand. He set it down on the closest table without looking at it, and it scraped against the surface and nearly tipped before the man beside him steadied it. Desmond did not notice. He was looking at Nadia. Nadia! His voice had a quality I had never heard in it. Not anger, he was past the automatic reflex of authority and into something rower than that. That was a private conversation. My daughter held his gaze with the steady patience of a person who has thought about this moment more than she let on. "You said it. It doesn't matter where you said it." Kenji reached me. His hand found my arm and his voice was low and very controlled. "What happened?" "He was on the phone in the hallway," I said, equally low. "She heard him." I watched Kenji process that. I watched him look at his father, and then at his daughter, and then back at his father. His jaw tightened once, and then the tightening moved down through his shoulders and settled there. Yumi appeared from somewhere to my left. She was still in her wedding dress, and she had the focused expression of a woman who has just spent 8 months planning a celebration and can feel it pivoting in a direction she didn't plan for. She looked at me first, then at Desmond, then at Nadia. "Dad," Yumi said carefully, "do you want to say something to her?" The room was still listening. The band had stepped back from their instruments with the quiet professionalism of people who understand when they are not the story anymore. The catering staff near the back had stopped moving. Brendan, Yumi's new husband, was standing behind her with his hand at the small of her back, his expression the careful neutral of a man who is very new to this family and is rapidly taking the full measure of what he has married into. Desmond crossed the floor toward the stage. He was a tall man, and he moved with the residual authority of someone who had spent decades walking into rooms and having them rearrange around him. But something was different in the mechanics of it. He was moving toward his granddaughter, and the movement did not have anywhere clear to go. "I want to speak to you privately," he said when he reached the edge of the stage area. He was speaking to Nadia, but his eyes moved briefly to me. "This is not the place." Nadia took one small step back from the microphone, and for a second I thought she was going to step down. Then she took a breath, the same deliberate breath I had watched her take before her school presentations, and she said, "You didn't say it privately. You said it in a hallway at a wedding with people around. You just didn't know I was one of them." That landed in the room like something physical. I heard someone near the back tables make a soft sound, not a laugh, not quite, but the involuntary exhale of a person absorbing a hit they witnessed secondhand. Yumi's hand went to her collarbone. Lorna, still at her table, had both hands flat on the tablecloth in front of her, and she was looking at Desmond with an expression I could not fully read from where I stood, but that I had never seen on her face before. Desmond looked at me. "Is this how you've raised her? To make scenes at family events?" And here is where 3 years of strategic quiet, of careful patience, of choosing the right moment over the satisfying one, simply and completely ended. I stepped past Nadia gently and faced him. "She didn't make a scene," I said, and my voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they're not fighting anything anymore. "She responded to something real that you said about her. You want to have a conversation about what's appropriate? Let's have it." "Right here." Desmond looked around the room, not nervously, but with the calculation of a man taking inventory of his audience. He had spent 40 years being the most powerful person in every room he entered. He was trying to find that position again and discovering it had moved. "This is Yumi's wedding," he said, and there was an appeal in it that was almost genuine. He was not entirely wrong. It was Yumi's wedding. Yumi took a step forward. "Dad." Her voice had the specific texture of someone choosing their next words with the care of someone handling something fragile. "Tell her you're sorry." Desmond turned to look at his daughter. They held that look for a long moment. "I said something in private that I should not have said where it could be overheard. That's different from—" "It's not different, Kenji." He had moved to stand beside me, and his voice was quiet and entirely flat. "It doesn't matter whether she was supposed to hear it. You said it about your granddaughter. You said she was a burden on this family." Desmond's mouth closed. He pressed his lips together once, and I watched him look at his son with the particular expression of a patriarch who has just realized that the leverage he thought he had with one of his children has shifted, and he is not sure when or how it happened. Around us, the reception had reorganized itself into something other than a party. The guests near the front were attentive in the way of people who feel they are witnessing something important. The ones farther back had gradually stopped their own conversations and turned. Nobody was pretending to be elsewhere anymore. One of Desmond's business friends, an older man named Clifton, who I had met at perhaps 4 family events over the years, had set down his napkin very carefully and was looking at Desmond with an expression of frank assessment that I do not think Desmond would have wanted to see from that direction. The band's lead musician, a woman in her 40s who had clearly navigated difficult reception moments before, leaned to her keyboard player and said something very quietly. The keyboard player nodded. They waited. Nadia had stepped down from the stage and was standing beside me. She was not crying. She was holding her phone in both hands, the screen dark, and she was looking at her grandfather with the expression of a child who came here with something to say and said it and is now waiting to find out what happens next. Desmond looked at her for a long moment. "Nadia." He said her name as if locating himself. I was frustrated. I said something I shouldn't have. It was the closest thing to an apology he knew how to produce under pressure. I could see that he believed it was sufficient. I could see, from the way Lorna's shoulders drew in slightly, that Lorna also knew it wasn't. My daughter looked at him for a beat. Then she said, "Frustrated about what, though?" Nobody in the room had expected that, least of all Desmond. He opened his mouth and then closed it. The man who had an answer for every business question his board ever raised, who had managed corporate negotiations and family crises and decades of complex relationships, with the smooth authority of someone who had never been caught genuinely off balance. He stood in the middle of his daughter's wedding reception and could not find the words for what he had meant to say. Because the honest answer was not available to him in that room, in front of those people, in front of his son and his daughter and his wife and the 112 witnesses who were all now waiting with him. I put my hand gently on Nadia's shoulder. "That's enough for right now," I said softly. She looked up at me, and I held her gaze, and she gave one small nod, the nod of a person who made their point and knows it landed. Then she let me guide her a few steps back, and I turned back to Desmond with the calm of someone who has been waiting for years for this specific alignment of circumstances. "We should talk," I said to him. "Tonight, not at the table, not in front of everyone, but tonight." It was not a request. Desmond looked at me, and for the first time in 7 years, he did not look like a man who was deciding how much to allow me to be right. He looked like a man who understood that something had changed and was working out how much had changed, and discovering the answer was more than he had been prepared for. He gave one short nod. Yumi touched my arm as Kenji guided Nadia toward the side of the room where there was a quiet corner with chairs. "Are you okay?" she asked, just for me. "Yes," I said. And then, because it was Yumi's wedding and Yumi had not created any of this, "I'm sorry it happened here." She looked at me with the direct, unsentimental clarity that she showed whenever she let the performance drop. "He's been doing this for a long time," she said. "To more than just you." She squeezed my arm once and then walked back toward Brendan, and I watched her find his hand, and I watched him hold it without asking her to explain anything. The band, reading the room with professional accuracy, started playing something soft and low. The ambient noise of conversation began to return, cautiously, in small pockets around the room. The evening was not over, and people were doing the human thing of finding their way back to celebration, because celebration was what they had come for, and because the alternative was acknowledging that they had all just witnessed something with implications none of them were fully equipped to process at a party. I found the table where Kenji had settled with Nadia, and I sat down, and I put one arm around my daughter, and she leaned against me with the boneless relief of a child who has been holding something taut for a long time and is finally allowed to let it go. "Are you okay?" I asked her. She thought about it with the honesty of a person who is still deciding. "Yes," she said finally. "I just wanted him to know. He knows." She picked at the edge of her wristlet clasp, the little magnetic one she'd been so proud of. "Mom, was that bad, that I did that?" I looked at her for a moment. I thought about what I knew about my daughter, her folded report card, her question from the car, her steadiness at the microphone, the way she had looked at me for half a second before she tapped it, not asking permission but confirming presence. "No," I said, "it wasn't bad." She nodded once, processing that, and then she spotted Yumi's sons across the room, and the decision formed on her face in real time. "Can I go?" "Go," she went. Kenji watched her cross the room. His hand found mine on the table. He didn't say anything for a moment, just the weight of his hand over mine and the silence of a man doing a long-delayed recalculation. "We need to have a real conversation with him," he said finally. "Tonight," I said. I already told him. Kenji turned to look at me. He searched my face for something, I'm not sure what exactly. Some indication of where I was, what I was planning, how far I was intending to take this. "What are you going to say to him?" I reached for my glass. "The truth, all of it, I think it's time." He was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, "The venue?" "Yes, everything." "Yes." His thumb moved slowly over the back of my hand. "Okay," he said. That was all he said. But the way he said it told me that the conversation I had dreaded having, the one where I explained 3 years of building something in the space my marriage gave me while his family made their assessments of me, that conversation was going to be all right. Not easy, but all right. That was enough. The reception wound down around 10:30 in the evening, the natural cadence of a party that has moved through all its phases, and by 11 most of the guests had found their coats and their rides and filtered out into the warm summer night. Brendan and Yumi said their goodbyes with the particular glow of people who have just gotten married and are choosing to hold that fact over everything else the evening had brought. I hugged Yumi. She held on for an extra second. "Call me," she said quietly. "I will." Desmond and Lorna were waiting in a small side room off the main hall, a sitting area with 2 sofas and low lighting, probably used for bridal preparations earlier in the day. Kenji and I went in. Nadia was with Yumi's babysitter and the cousins in another part of the venue, accounted for, not present for this. The four of us sat down, and the room settled around us, and I looked at Desmond Hara across the low table, and I started talking. I told him about Meridian. I told him about the lease, the construction timeline, the investor group, the projected opening. I told him about Bet Akhafer and what she had seen in the concept from the first meeting. I told him the venue was going to seat up to 400 people for events, and that we had already fielded inquiries from 3 major corporate clients before we had even opened our doors. He listened with the stillness of a man absorbing information that does not fit the model he has been operating on. When I finished the factual portion, I paused, and then I said the other part. I have been building this for 3 years. I did not tell you about it because every time I have brought something real to this family, you have found a way to make me feel like I am performing ambition rather than achieving it. You offered to connect me to an administrative coordinator position after I had already closed a $216,000 contract. You restructured your family trust in ways that made it clear I was an adjunct to this family rather than a member of it. And tonight your granddaughter, my daughter, heard you call her a burden. That last one is the one that is not recoverable in the same way the other things were. Lorna made a small sound that she quickly controlled. Desmond had been looking at me with that new expression, the one without the certainty in it, and now he looked down at his hands on his knees. His hands were still. He was not a man given to visible fidgeting. The stillness was its own language. The venue, he said, and his voice had a different weight in it than I was used to. Not diminished exactly, recalibrated. You built this while coming to Sunday dinners and family reunions and sitting at your table and being told I should apply for administrative jobs, yes. He was quiet for a long time. Lorna looked at her husband with an expression that I had never seen her aim at him directly. It was not unkind, but it was not deferential either. It was the expression of a woman who has been managing the gap between who her husband is and who he believes himself to be for a very long time, and who has just watched that gap become undeniable. Desmond, she said quietly, what you said about Nadia. His chin came up slightly. I was on the phone with. I know who you were on the phone with. Lorna's voice was not raised. It did not need to be. That is not the point. Kenji leaned forward. Dad, she heard you say she was a burden. She is 11. She recorded it because she didn't think anyone would believe her otherwise. That is what we have built here. The word we had edges in it, not accusing, worse than accusing. Honest. Desmond looked at his son for a long moment. Something moved through his face that I can only describe as the internal audit of a powerful man reaching the end of a very long, very expensive miscalculation and beginning to tally the real cost. I will talk to her, he said, not bristling, not defending, just the flat acknowledgement of a man who has run out of the maneuvers that would let him avoid it. That's a start, Kenji said. There was more conversation that night, more specific, more detailed, more painful in places than I will lay out here, because some of it belonged to Kenji and his father in ways that were not mine to narrate. What I will say is that I sat in that room for 2 hours, and I did not soften a single thing I said, and I did not perform patience I did not feel, and it was the first time in 7 years that I occupied the full dimension of who I am in a room with Desmond Hara. He did not dissolve. He did not apologize in the sweeping, cinematic way that would make for a tidier story. He was who he was, a man in his late 60s who had built his identity on a particular kind of authority and who was discovering in real time that the foundation of it was narrower than he had believed. But by the end of that night, something had shifted. Not fixed. Shifted. The pretense was over. That was enough to work from. Desmond spoke to Nadia the following morning, at our house, privately. I do not know everything he said because I was not in the room for it. Nadia told me afterward that he apologized. She said he seemed, in her words, like he didn't know how to do it right, but he tried. She seemed to accept that. Children are often more practically generous than the situation strictly requires. He was not at Meridian's opening, which happened the following October, but Lorna was. She came with Yumi and Brendan, and she stood in the entrance of the venue I had spent 3 years building and looked around at the clean lines and the good light, and the way the space moved people naturally from one area to another, and she said, "This is extraordinary, Myra," and she meant it. I thanked her and meant that too. In the weeks after the wedding, the dynamics inside the Hara family rearranged themselves in the quiet, unglamorous way that real change actually happens, not with a single dramatic pivot, but but with the accumulation of small adjustments that add up, eventually, to something different. Desmond stopped offering me professional advice. He stopped making the sound, the not-quite word that had greeted my answer about event design all those years ago, at family dinners. He was not transformed into a warmly supportive father-in-law. He was a complicated, proud, 71-year-old man who had been shown something true about himself and was doing the slow, uncomfortable work of integrating it. Lorna and I had coffee in September, and she said something I have thought about a number of times since. She said, "I knew more than I let on. I want you to know I'm aware of that." She didn't dress it up or turn it into a longer apology than it was. She just said it plainly, and I took it the way it was offered plainly. Yumi called me in late August, as promised, and we talked for 2 hours about everything. About her father. About the patterns she had grown up inside of, and the ways she had learned to navigate them, and the ways she wished she had pushed back harder sooner. She had her own accounting to do, and I wasn't the one to do it for her, but I was glad she was doing it. She is doing well, for what it's worth. Brendan is exactly what she needed, it turns out. The kind of steady that doesn't require managing. Meridian opened in October to the kind of response I had allowed myself to privately hope for but would not have said out loud. The first 2 months of bookings confirmed that Bet Ockhafer's instincts had been right and my 3 years of work had been right. The venue was real, it was mine, and it was successful in the concrete, measurable way that leaves no room for the kind of dismissal I had spent 7 years quietly absorbing. My daughter started 6th grade this past September. She made the regional qualifying round for a science competition, which is not a surprise to me but surprised her, which was a joy to watch. She has her father's dark eyes and my stubbornness, and the specific, durable confidence of a child who stood at a microphone in a wedding reception hall and said what she needed to say and was not wrong for saying it. She asked me once, a few weeks after the wedding, whether Grandpa Des was still mad at her. I told her no. She accepted that and went back to whatever she was doing, with the easy forward momentum of a person who raised the issue, heard the answer, and is already looking at the next thing. I stood there watching her for a moment and felt something that did not have a clean name, but was the closest thing to settled that I have felt in a long time. There are people who would say my daughter should not have done what she did at that wedding. That she was too young, that it was not her battle, that a reception hall full of adults in formal wear was not the right venue for a child's grief over what her grandfather thought of her. I have turned this over many times, and I keep arriving at the same place. She was not wrong about what she heard. She was not wrong that it mattered. She was not wrong to want it acknowledged in a room where it could not be easily moved past without consequence. Maybe the only thing she was wrong about was the setting, but nobody handed her a better one. She used what she had. I think about that sometimes. I think about all of us, Nadia and Desmond and Kenji and Lorna and Yumi, each of us using what we had for as long as we had it, and about the specific kind of relief that comes when you stop. So, did she go too far? Or not far enough? I've heard both. Tell me what you think.